Night music. We gathered like naked mole rats, our whiskers alert to the slightest vibrations, as Jackson loosened a burlap sack and began to pluck out a series of stringed instruments. Like he was Santa Claus. No matter they were not usable in the normal sense. Tuning pegs broken, necks cracked, holes where there shouldn't be any holes. Underground where we lived, it was all we had. Jackson was one of those showboaters who I think I might have liked under normal circumstances. Like if we were next door neighbors, above world, and he owned a better boat than I did, or drove a faster car, had a prettier wife, more real estate on his barbecue. But underground, because of our close proximity, the way our eyes had grown soft on account of so little light, the music he brought in really mattered. It had been so long since we'd heard any that when he set one of those broken guitars on his knee and began to strum, twisting the tuning pegs and humming, we all took a step forward. Practically Pavlovian. Then he made a little joke. "Thank you all for coming out here tonight," he said. Two boys in the back whistled. Some of us laughed and clapped, and when the noise died, he struck the first chord. To my ear, it sounded a little sour, like there were multiple strings missing. I couldn't get close enough to see. My wife squeezed my ribs and tried to kiss me on the cheek. No one else seemed to notice how bad he was, or maybe they were all in denial. It was like he had us all in a spell. Some of the older people began groping, moving back and forth. Dancing, I think, is what we used to call it. In the low light, I saw an exuberant flash of yellow teeth. So many folks grinning and smiling. It was like they'd finally found something to take away some of their troubles. Jackson and his impromptu jug band was such a hit that night, it must have seemed like sour grapes for me to complain. I had no musical training, as my wife kindly reminded me on the way back to our hovel. "You're just jealous," she said. I'm not jealous. I think he's kind of cute. Kind of cute? He's missing most of his teeth. I like the sound of his voice, she said. A low baritone that hits you in the nether regions. Here, she winked and I had to look away and clench my fists. I can sing too, I said, though I'd only ever sung in the shower, back when we had the luxury of bathing. Since when? Tell me your favorite song and I'll sing it. I'll belt it out right now. She stopped to consider for a moment before shaking her head. I don't remember the names anymore. Well, as soon as you think of one, just let me know. If you can hum it, I can sing it. Jackson makes his own music, sweetie. Those weren't originals, not all of them. He puts his own spin on things. He makes them his own. You got your thing and he's got his. Ooh, do you remember this one? And here I began to belt out a chorus. A lady with sparkles, she walks while I waddle, and the whole town is mad in the head. Did you write that? No, I coughed suddenly, confidence completely drained. I don't know who wrote it. Anyway, I don't remember the rest. Maybe it's one of Jackson's. I don't think so. Jackson ain't a musician, darling, not professionally. You're just jealous. I'll bet he's already got a fan club down here, girls half his age, and you want in. He used to sell life insurance, baby. That wasn't his passion, though. You heard him. That wasn't what he wanted to be. In real life, I'd been stymied, too. Like, I always thought I'd be a record critic, but then records went away, and newspapers and magazines soon followed. No one would pay for my music reviews, so I had to get a job at a corporation that used genomic information to advance the cure for various forms of cancer. Noble work, that's what my wife used to say. Especially on the Monday mornings when I had a hard time motivating. Wish I could say I played a bigger role, not that any of it mattered, after we had to move underground. We sleep in shifts, and I was resting when I awoke to that awful racket. What I could only assume was Jackson and his friends practicing, muffled slightly by the walls of the cave. I nudged my wife, but she continued to snore. I was so irritated I finally got up and left our little hovel and walked right down the passageway toward the noise. When I got to the source, I knocked on the limestone wall, not with my knuckles, but with the flat of my hand. I kept on knocking, too, as the noise continued, enveloped suddenly in a sense memory of my own father knocking on my wall whenever I kept the stereo on a little too long or loud. "Turn that shit down," he'd say, and that's what I was saying now. And a pit of something dark began to form in my stomach as I realized with revulsion I was the same age now as my father had once been, that despite my best intentions, I'd basically become my old man. The music stopped. and the rock in front of the cave rolled to the side. "Freddie," Jackson. "Sorry, mate, are we bothering you?" "Well, it is a little late for all that, don't you think?" Jackson grinned, that sort of twinkle he'd no doubt used in the past to sell $1 million policies. "Come on in. You got to hear this new number me and the boys have been cooking up." He fixed me with his half-mad eyes, wrapped his arm around my neck. I hesitated, but only for a moment before I stepped inside. It was dark in there. I mean, not much darker than it was outside, but it took a while for my eyes to adjust. All I could see was the orange cherry of a hashish cigarette flit across the room like a lonely firefly. "Everyone, this is Freddie. Freddie, everyone." There were 4 or 5 others, and they nodded and coughed and continued to smoke in the darkness. "Freddie used to be a music critic. Ain't that right, Freddie?" "That was a long time ago," I said, but I was happy he remembered. "Here, sit," he said, and he cleared a place for me on the sofa. "I think we ought to get Freddie's professional opinion on our latest song. Like, if he likes it, maybe he'll agree to be our manager." I waved him away, but I had to admit it felt good to be wanted. I decided I had to listen and try to maintain my sense of impartiality, because really that was all I had left. But maybe I could be their Epstein. Where would we go? A tour for the end of the world. I could already see the lettering on black t-shirts, and though the electrical grid was down, I suppose there was still some way to fill a stadium. "What's it like out there?" I asked. "Like when you and the boys were out scavenging?" Jackson laughed and took a puff on the cigarette. He shook his head and began to tune his guitar as he exhaled. The instruments seemed to be in better shape, as if since their first unveiling he'd found time to fix them. Not to suggest they were in any way perfect or even acceptable under normal conditions. I could tell, even before the first note was struck, that the performance would be challenging, and not like prog rock challenging. Strings still missing, pieces of terry cloth bandaged around the body of a wounded mandolin. The large acoustic bass had 2 pieces of elm tacked to either side like splints to support its fractured neck. I'd be amazed if they could even keep it in tune. "The thing is," Jackson said, "you have to forget what came before if you want to invent something new." I smiled and nodded, and then someone passed me the cigarette. When the music began, I closed my eyes. You wouldn't think there'd be much of a difference since the light was so bad anyway, but everything went from gray to black. I'd been dreaming in gray. Everyone had. That was one of the problems with living underground. But when I heard the first strains of the diminished minor chords rumble outward from Jackson's guitar, with my eyes closed, I thought I could see a yellow swallowtail butterfly. So vibrant I gasped and reflexively reached for it, and then I felt a little embarrassed, folding my arms against the hollow of my chest. When I was a teenager, I spent an awful lot of time in my room, lying in bed, eyes closed, listening to music. My parents worried. Mother thought I was depressed. She said it wasn't good to be so isolated, and she didn't understand the music. She worried about it. She'd write down the names of bands most likely to be of concern and take them with her when she visited the priest in our parish. He'd promised to do a little research and try to comfort her, but later he'd report back with information that only made her more concerned. To me, it was just night music, a way to get through long spouts of loneliness, escape my thoughts, if only for a little while. But then I noticed my albums began to disappear. Like Mom, at the urging of Father O'Grady, had seized the ones the 2 of them determined were most likely products of Satan. "Satan's your thing, Mom." That's what I told her. And she'd tear up and ask if I was on drugs. Now here I was in the dark of Jackson's Hollow. Everything worse than even I'd been able to imagine. I hadn't seen my parents for a long, long time, and I sort of missed them. I missed their quiet admonishments, how impossibly square they were, and how I suppose I never once doubted that they loved me, even after all my records had vanished, even after they were no longer there. When the song ended, I was back in the gray shelter, leaning against a broken spring, brushing tears from my eyes. "You liked it," Jackson said. I hadn't even heard it, not most of it, but I didn't tell him that. I just sort of held my breath and nodded and clapped in the dark.